are just coming back from lunch, and I guess for you is 10 o'clock in the morning, right?
Just gone 10:30.
I can see in your watch.
I've lost your okay. I've lost your audio, your video.
My video?
I can't see inside. The camera was on, and I got a good picture of the meeting room, and now I can't see.
Yeah, you will activate the camera and keep it activated so that it makes it more comfortable for Paul to see the people.
It looks like a good connection.
So can you see us now?
I see you.
Okay, excellent. So Paul, let me just brief you. Today we had a series of lectures. We started with the general concept of sustainability that was provided by Giuseppe. Then Catherine spoke about social and ethical aspects relevant to decommissioning and environmental remediation. And then I spoke about sustainability and circularity in environmental remediation. It means that your lectures flow very well into the list of topics that we are dealing with. We have something like 20 plus attendees here from different countries that include locals from Armenia, also from Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Russia, Hungary, Romania, Brazil, Argentina, Thailand, Iraq, Iran, Egypt. I guess that I took everybody, right? In Jordan, yes, of course, in Jordan. And without further ado, I give you the floor so that you can, if you will, introduce yourself and start with the presentation. We will share the slides, I guess, and take from there. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you see the slides okay?
Yes, we are good. And if you prefer that questions are asked during the presentation, or you prefer to finish so people can ask you questions?
I don't mind. I'll go with what your usual policy has been, Horst, in the meeting.
So if you have anything that is not clear, and this is really important that you understand the indicators, you just let us know, and then you have the chance to ask a question to Paul. If there is not a burning question, you save the question to the end of the presentation. So let's get started.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, Horst, Kat Canal, Adam, I hope I said that correctly, and all of your colleagues for inviting me to talk to you. Thank you, dear audience, for coming, and I hope that what I will say will be of some use to you. My background is that I've worked in land remediation since the late 1980s, and more recently I've become quite interested in the idea of sustainability and how we can look at determining what's our most sustainable approach to remediation. So I began working after my PhD at a government agency. I then moved to a university, and then I set up this small company in 1997. And we are quite small, we're just 5 people. I am the co-chair of the Sustainable Remediation Forum in the UK, and I'm in various other networks. Most of my projects are outside the UK. I've worked widely across Europe, in the EU, but also in other countries like Kosovo. I've worked in Asia, in Japan and China, and I've worked in the Americas, in Colombia and the USA. So I've got quite a wide experience, and I've also worked with agencies like the World Bank. Saying all of that, each of you are working for quite large agencies in your home countries, and I am quite sure that you will have a lot of different experiences that you can bring to this presentation. So I'm going to make a presentation about sustainability indicators and criteria. Sorry, is that someone asking something?
No.
Okay, I will continue. I don't see the view of the audience.
No, Paul, nobody's asking. I'll ask.
I was thinking, Horst, if the camera is on, you can simply wave at me if you need me to stop at any point.
Yeah, I can also come to the microphone, but
Sure.
the colleague here is reactivating the camera. But you are, yeah, we are set. Thank you.
Thanks. So, I know it's the afternoon. I hope you've all had a lovely lunch. So what I propose to do is there'll be a talking segment, which will be about 45 minutes, and then some time for questions. And then an exercise, which I'll introduce, and then you're going to have a go with these criteria. And after your coffee, come back in your different groups, and you will present what you found. And after that, we'll have a little discussion, and then I'll close with a case study. I think 3 hours of listening to my voice on a nice sunny afternoon after lunch would be more than any of you could bear. So I thought it'd be a good idea to break it up. By the way, if one of the organizers could send me the upload link again, I'll put all of these slide decks on the upload, and it's quite okay for you to share PDFs of them. So this first segment, which is my talk, I'm going to introduce to you what the Sustainable Remediation Forum is in the UK. I'm going to expand a bit on what Giuseppe has said to you about why sustainability, to link that to sustainable remediation. And then we'll talk about indicators and criteria. And then I'll introduce you to our checklist of indicators. Now this will be very detailed. I'm not expecting you to remember all of the detail, but there are links where you can pick the checklist and the other guidance up. And for the exercise this afternoon, obviously you can take these slides, and I'll upload them as soon as I'm emailed the link. I'll give you some warnings at each section, so you know where you are in the presentation. Horst, did you have a chance to show this video to people?
I forgot. I'm sorry, but you can do it now if you want.
I'll see if I can get it to work.
Right. If not, we want to manage over here.
If you lose the screen, then please tell me. I'm just going to switch screen share. Horst, can you see a YouTube screen now? It's mainly black, and at the top it says clear circle.
It is black right now.
And do you see in the top left corner something that says Clear Surf UK?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, can you hear the sound?
Yes, we can hear the sound, but we cannot see anything.
It's coming.
Good.
Our industrial history has left behind a legacy of contaminated land and groundwater, which can present a risk to people and the environment. In some cases, the land remains in use, but in others, there is an opportunity for redevelopment. In either case, the risks from the contamination need to be managed, and this process is known as remediation. The technologies used in remediation have evolved over time, from simply removing the contaminated soil to landfill, or simply trying to pump out and treat contaminated groundwater, to more sophisticated and targeted solutions. However, even though it's done for good reasons, the process of remediation itself can have a negative impact on the environment and the surrounding community if not done well. So the focus has now shifted to encouraging stakeholder input into shaping a solution that avoids unacceptable environmental, social, and economic impacts and seeks more positive outcomes. This concept is known as sustainable remediation. Sustainable remediation has three key elements: environmental, economic, and social, which all need to be in balance and the impact of each considered. Overall, the goals of remediation must seek to protect human health and the wider environment. Any approach needs to be based on sound science, using clear evidence and a transparent decision-making process. The safety of workers and the general public must also be fully taken into account, along with the views of different stakeholders. To make these choices, we need a way to understand or assess sustainability. Surf UK has developed a guiding framework and a series of indicators which include environmental aspects encompassing soil, water and air, social aspects like the effect on health and communities, and economic aspects such as overall cost versus returns. Other effects that can be assessed include the impact on surrounding property values, be it detrimental or beneficial. It's also important to identify the circumstances that need to be considered in an assessment to ensure that options are compared on a like-for-like basis. Sometimes a solution can be shown to be sustainable using simple and basic methods of assessment. In other cases, a more complex assessment is needed. For this reason, a tiered approach is used, but always within the context and objectives set at the beginning. This begins as a qualitative approach and can become more quantitative if simpler approaches don't arrive at a clear answer. Greater gains can be achieved if sustainable remediation is considered early in the planning process, as this can affect the approach for different areas of the site, the risks to be managed, and the methods chosen to achieve a certain set of goals. Surf UK's framework for sustainable remediation and its supporting guidance is changing the face of remediation in the UK and helped shape a new ISO standard to support sustainable remediation around the world. For further information about Surf UK and sustainable remediation, visit www.clare.co.uk/Surf UK.
So before I go back to the slides, two things about this video. This video, any of you can view it from this link. It has subtitles in quite a few languages, I think including Arabic, simplified Chinese, maybe Russian, various European languages, Albanian even. So you can obviously make use of this at home if you want to. It's a very simple introduction, and I will go over some of the points about sustainability assessment in my talk. My second thing that I want to say is, Horst, does anyone want to ask any questions immediately as a result of the video, or shall I just move ahead?
Any questions right now, guys? No, just to comment that what the video showed was perfectly in line with what has been presented so far. So that was very nice, Paul. Thanks.
Very good. At least we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
So we should be back on the slide deck. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see.
Thanks. Sorry to keep asking you questions.
No problem.
So, SURF UK, there are multiple sustainable remediation forums around the world. And Sustainable Remediation Forum UK is the one that was set up in here. It was established in 2007 to develop ideas of sustainable remediation, and its first publication came as a framework document in 2010. It's a project, it's a collaboration of all different kinds of stakeholders, regulators, for instance, our Environment Agency, industry, for instance, companies like National Grid and Shell, academics, and consultants and people from business. It's independently coordinated by a not-for-profit or a charity organisation for contaminated land knowledge that's been set up in the UK, and that's called CLARE. CLARE has got multiple resources which are free for you to access, not just about sustainable remediation. I mean, briefly, we published a framework by which we mean we explained our concept of sustainability and remediation in 2010, and we came up with the first checklist of sustainability indicators in 2011. We began with case studies in 2014 and a lot of supporting guidance. We began to revise this and we made this animation, which we produced in 2019, and our updated checklist came out in 2020. In 2021, we developed something called Sustainable Management Practices, which I will show you. And over the years following, we've been quite engaged with an international network of sustainable remediation fora. So, moving on to the next slot of my talk. Question is, this is just a recap from what Giuseppe will already have told you, which is, why do we want things to be sustainable? Why do we want this balance, the sweet spot between environmental, social and economic criteria? Well, it's to be able to show that there's a net benefit for the work we're doing. So if we are remediating a site, we don't want the cure to be worse than the illness. So we're trying to show a net benefit, that the positive benefits overall are greater than the negative impacts of doing the work. For instance, we're not treating a chlorinated solvent contaminated site simply by pumping the solvents out from the soil and into the atmosphere. So the idea of sustainable and risk-based land management, this is for historically chemically contaminated sites. I think risk management is slightly different in the context of radionuclides, as Horst will have been explaining to you. But on the one hand, we want to mitigate unacceptable risks from contaminants. So this is the box on the left. And on the other hand, we want to maximize our sustainability gains. And those sustainability gains might be things like better community health, because you've established, for example, a public park on an area that was formerly brownfield. And we want to minimize our sustainability losses. For example, the carbon cost of the remediation we might be doing. And we can apply this thinking across a portfolio of sites. Many of you might have more than one site, so it might be quite a good idea to think about how you will manage those in a sustainable way at an overarching level. For example, if you're excavating soil at one site, maybe you can use it at another site to avoid soil disposal. You can consider it within a specific site plan. So when you're planning out a site, you might be able to make quite large sustainability gains simply by the design of your site and putting buildings and car park in one place and open ground for another zone of the site. Or you might be looking at specific contamination problems. Now, I've called these source pathway receptor linkages in this diagram. I'm not quite sure if that's a connection that you use in the nuclear world, but what I'm meaning is a specific problem. For example, a specific connection between a contaminant, a pathway, and something that might be affected, like a water body.
Absolutely, yes. We just talked about this earlier today and yesterday. You're on the same path.
Very good. So our goal is to find an optimum remediation solution through a balanced decision-making process that also needs to be inclusive, that mitigates the risks that we find unacceptable, but at the same time maximizes the overall net benefit. So we can call this sustainable and risk-based land management. And there's some good reasons for doing this, which I'm going to come to. So different countries have made different definitions of this idea of sustainable remediation. In the UK, the definition is the practice of demonstrating in terms of environmental, economic and social indicators that the benefit of doing the remediation is greater than the impact, that you've found an optimum solution, then you've used a balanced decision-making process. There are different definitions in different countries, but the general content is similar and now is part of an international standard, which I'll show you the link for. Some countries might use a different terminology. So, for example, in China, they tend to use the expression green and sustainable remediation. In the USA, they also use this because when sustainable remediation thinking started, the regulator, the US EPA, called it green remediation, and the industry called it sustainable remediation. They had a long time arguing about this, and in the end decided to use the expression green and sustainable remediation. But most countries simply say sustainable remediation because the environmental green aspects is already a big part of sustainability. So this is a concept that is widespread. I really hope that you will take it back to your home countries. In this chart, all the countries that are in deep green, I'm sorry, it might be a bit small to see the writing, so I'll explain it. All the countries that are in deep green already have an active sustainable remediation network, and the countries that are in light green are connected because they're in an international network. So there's a network for remediation in South America, and this looks to sustainable remediation. So while Argentina doesn't have its own forum, it benefits from being in this network. And in Europe, there's a network called the Common Forum. So all countries in Europe, and also another one called Nicole, by the way, all countries in Europe are therefore plugged in through this network. There is an international standard. I don't know if that's bright enough or big enough for you to see. It is quite expensive, but perhaps IAEA can do something to give you access. Its number is 18504 2017. But actually, you can get all the same information in Claire's own guidance, which is free. I wanted to tell you also that there's an alliance of all of these sustainable remediation networks. It's called ISRA. I will make sure to send Horst the link for ISRA. If any of you want to make a sustainability network for contaminated sites in your own country, this alliance would be very happy to help you. So why should we look at sustainable and risk-based land management? Well, I hope that you kind of already feel it's inherently obvious, but to spell it out, the risk-based part is very helpful because it gives us a means of objectively understanding likely harm. So instead of taking a guess that something might be harmful or hazardous, we have risk assessment as a framework and a tool to give us an objective understanding of harm. And this approach, where we have a source, pathway, and receptor, also gives us a way of structuring our responses. So we could respond at the level of the source, or the pathway, or the receptor. It gives us a way of designing our remediation. And finally, because we have an objective understanding of likely harm, we're able to prioritize our resources to the most significant and urgent problems. So, for example, I'd imagine in Russia you have multiple contaminated sites and limited resources. So this is a way of you understanding which are the most serious and dangerous sites in an objective way, so you know where to start. If we bring in sustainability, then we get further benefits. We can optimize our risk management. For example, picking solutions that reduce secondary impacts, like impacts to atmosphere or water that might come accidentally from remediation. We can maximize the benefit and therefore provide greater value. So, for instance, we could look at combining remediation with renewable energy. For instance, having remediation that's linked to using plants and the production of biofeedstock at the same time. So this might give us better cost effectiveness, which might allow us to bring sites to restoration that otherwise we couldn't pay for. Another very useful outcome of sustainability assessment is that it's very good at identifying project risks. So a project risk is basically the chance of something going wrong. You probably may not have heard of this very important scientific law called Murphy's Law. It's also called Sod's Law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And this seems to be almost like a curse on big and complicated projects. But we can anticipate things that might go wrong through sustainability assessment. We can anticipate if there are inherent uncertainties in the technology. We can anticipate if the community might be potentially badly impacted by a particular remediation approach. So that gives us a chance of avoiding project risks. An example of this from the UK has been that we've been very busy developing our old coal gas sites into new urban housing and parkland. And as we do this, some of the processes can cause quite a lot of odor. And this has actually led to public protests against the remediation and local politicians getting involved and the project being stalled. And the local community is saying, your remediation is making us sick. We can smell it. My little boy is not going to school because he's feeling sick. It's your fault because you're doing the remediation. And then the technical people, the scientists and the consultants doing the remediation are saying, no, it's not true. We've got all of these technical models and they show that while you can smell it, actually that smell isn't harmful. But the technical guys are missing the point. The smell is harmful because it's making the community distressed. It's undermining their well-being. And because of that, there is this strong reaction to the project. Now, this is a failure in stakeholder engagement, but it's also something that could have been picked up by an earlier sustainability assessment. So I just wanted to emphasize that point about project risks. Another thing that you can do with sustainability assessment is you can demonstrate and document how your project links to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and whatever government or corporate policies for sustainable development you need to comply with in your home country. And being able to show that you've engaged with stakeholders and you're looking after sustainability can have a very positive benefit for reputation and public relations. Horst, I'm going to stop here for 1 minute because I get the feeling you might want to reinforce one or two of these points, and then I'll move to my next slide.
No, we just introduced the concept that you are talking about, that remediation should do more good than harm. I think that was very clear in the very beginning, and I guess that both highlighted in practical examples, particularly those that the technical community may not believe or may not take it as a harm, the odor, but it's very distressing for the community. So when you are doing these remediation works, what these indicators would help you is to identify and eventually anticipate. I guess that I'm reinforcing what you just said, anticipate the problems that you might incur because you might leave out some important considerations. So keep that in mind, right? And I also appreciate when you talked about green remediation and sustainable remediation, being green remediation as an integral part of sustainable remediation. That was essentially what the US EPA proposes green remediation, but sustainable remediation is a bit more a broader concept than green remediation. But I guess that the messages are, I insist, perfectly in line, even though not being strictly related to the nuclear area, the concepts are essentially very much the same. So there is no big issue in terms of doing remediation in the nuclear field, in the non-nuclear field. The basic concepts are still valid. Okay? Any question for Paul right now? Anything that you want to highlight or wasn't clear? Is everything clear? Yeah? Anything from there? No, Paul, you can go on.
Thank you. But I've already mentioned this a little bit. It's a question about when you consider sustainable remediation. From Surf UK identifies what it calls stage A and stage B. In my earlier slide, I said that you could probably even go before then if you're looking at a collection of sites. So the first stage is when you're defining the project, you're identifying what the land use is, and you're making your specific plans for the sites, how you'll zone out the site, and then you investigate those zones and make the risk assessment. We call that stage A. And you can make some significant sustainability gains here, for example, by changing the location or the uses of the different zones of the site. Usually, when you've finished all of that land use planning and that site investigation risk assessment, you've spent a lot of money. So the second stage is when you're in the detailed planning of deciding which remediation techniques you're actually going to use. That's based on what we call a remediation options appraisal, and that has tended to be a very technical discussion related to ground conditions like its hydrogeology, the contaminants, the context of the site, and our argument is to also include sustainability. You can get sustainability gains here, for instance, by choosing a treatment over a disposal to landfill, but you get the greatest sustainability gains the earlier you think about it. In the animation, it talked about this thing called a tiered approach. And sustainability assessment is not necessarily hugely expensive, but it does have a cost. So the idea is to try and take the decision on the lowest cost that you can find. So the Surf UK, it begins with a set of suggestions for general good practice, which it calls sustainable management practices, which I'll tell you about later. And then Surf UK suggests that you begin sustainability assessment for your remediation options appraisal in a qualitative way. So that's based on rankings, for instance. And our experience is that usually gives you enough information to decide the majority of sites. If you don't get a clear finding from that, for example, the stakeholders can't agree on rankings, then you can move to a semi-quantitative approach. And these are usually based on what's called multi-criteria decision analysis. And this is where you make scores and weightings. This is a more costly approach. Some consultants like to go straight to MCDA. In a minority of cases, you might need to go to a quantitative assessment where you carry out formal cost-benefit analysis, for instance, or you carry out a formal life cycle assessment, which could be difficult for the remediations we have in mind, or formal analytical carbon footprint to support the decision. The difficulty with these quantitative methods is that they don't cover as many indicators. So this is the reason that this is drawn in a triangle. Qualitative is simpler, and therefore you can think about lots of different criteria. Multi-criteria assessment becomes more complicated, so typically you reduce the number of criteria. And for quantitative, you get into quite a lot of difficulty because some criteria are very hard to quantify. For example, how do you quantify landscape? So coming back to these sustainability management practices, these are just some simple ideas that are easy to apply for all projects, from site investigation all the way through. Qualitative, this is sufficient for most projects, as long as you are using good lines of evidence. Some consultants do like to go straight into a semi-quantitative approach, and some regulators. This is a very cultural thing. So, for instance, in the UK and the Netherlands, decision makers are quite happy with a qualitative approach. In the USA, China, they're really quite uncomfortable with it, and they want numbers. So they want scores and weights. It doesn't matter to them that the scores and weights are no more reliable than the ranking. They just feel more comfortable to have that approach. And as I said, for the quantitative approach, these are quite complex, and they tend to have a limited coverage of the issues that you might need to look at for your site. So this is a sustainable management practice. And on the CLARE website, we've got lots of these cartoons. Don't allow plant and equipment to run for no purpose, or switch your lorry off while it's waiting. This reduces air emissions, it reduces waste and the consumption of natural resources, the fuel. It's better for human health and safety. There's no exhaust. There's no risk of someone knocking the brake off and the lorry then crashing into something. It's better for the neighborhood. It's less noisy, for instance. And it even saves you money. So this, you don't need to do any complicated sustainability assessment for. It's self-evident. And there are a number of these little cartoons and a spreadsheet that you can use to identify what sustainable management practices might be best for your project on the CLARE website at that link. For the sustainability assessment itself, it looks like this. It's not as bad as it looks on this chart. The most important starting point is to frame your sustainability assessment. You might have to repeat it. You might have to move from qualitative to semi-quantitative to quantitative approaches. So you need to ground the whole sustainability assessment in the same frame. Otherwise, at each stage, you're going to be looking at things that you're not sure are the issues you began with. There are two main steps in framing, which I'll talk about in more detail later. There's the preparation of the sustainability assessment, which is basically describing the decision, the project, the conditions of the project, and who you're going to involve in the assessment and who it's reported to. And then you define the assessment. So you summarize your preparation in a series of clear objectives. You have to set boundaries, which I'll come to. The scope, i.e. what do we mean by sustainability? The indicators. The methodology, how we're going to combine all of these different individual indicators to some overall understanding of sustainability. And then something about dealing with uncertainty. Uncertainties might be because we don't have enough information, or because different stakeholders disagree about how important something is, or how things rank. Once we've got the framing, then we carry out the sustainability assessment. So execution isn't talking about hanging people, this is carrying out of the sustainability assessment. And usually this begins as a series of comparisons for individual indicators. We have to combine or aggregate these in an overall assessment model, which we then need to interpret. We need to decide if there are any uncertainties that we've got to investigate, and then we finally present our findings. But this is also iterative. So if you were trying to have everybody around the table at the same time to do the framing and then to do the execution, you might find it quite difficult. It's often advisable to begin with a pilot sustainability assessment carried out by a small team, and then use that to open out the discussions with other stakeholders. If you go to a regulator with a blank piece of paper, they're probably not going to be able to tell you very much because they won't be able to. So it's better to have a model. So typically there will be a number of iterations, and the sustainability assessment will be refined and reviewed at each stage before there's a final report. Whilst I'm taking longer than I should with this, so I'll have to pick up some time in the exercise. I apologize.
Keep going, please.
The first question here in my little chart is what's an indicator and what's a criterion? So an indicator is basically the quality, something that's important in achieving sustainability, that you can at least compare between different remediation options, even if you can't quantify. For example, its carbon cost or its effect on the landscape. If we think the quality is quantifiable, then we might call it a metric. So a metric means something that we can quantify. When we've decided which indicators are interesting for our sustainability assessment, then they become criteria. So a decision is based on a series of criteria. So a criterion is an indicator that's being used in a decision or an assessment. Obviously, you'll keep the slide deck, so you'll keep these definitions. But the language is difficult, but it can become quite important. For instance, you could be arguing with somebody about an indicator and whether it's measurable or not. And you might find it useful then to say, well, this is an indicator, but not a metric, and this one is a metric, and describing why you think it can be quantified. Or talking about what's inside the decision and what's outside the decision. So this is where we might use the word criterion. Within Circ UK, we've made a checklist of indicators, and we've divided those into 15 overall groups. And not all of these are quantifiable, but they can all at least be compared on the basis of lines of evidence. And you guys define the lines of evidence. So lines of evidence means basically your arguments and your rationale. So this might be based on a series of expert opinions. It might be based on the views of different stakeholders. It might be based on some kind of measurements, like a cost benefit or a carbon footprint. But this is the evidence that supports your assessment. And it can be really useful to have a checklist of indicators that you're going to consider, because it means that for each project you do, you know that you're going to go through the same family of possible indicators. You don't have to use them all, and you might be able to add extra indicators to it, but at least you've got the same starting point, and you can be assured that people are having to think quite widely about sustainability. So the checklist that Surf UK provides is called, the report is called SR2. And it's available from that web link that I've already given you. And our 15 overarching categories are divided across the 3 elements of sustainability: environment, social, and economic. You'll see 5 in each. And that's quite deliberate, because we do not want to imply that any one element is more important than another element. Briefly, emissions to air covers things like greenhouse gases, acid rain type gases, Montreal Protocol emissions, ground air quality. Soil and ground conditions looks at the functionality of the soil and ground. Groundwater and surface water, again, that's fairly self-evident, as is ecology. Natural resources and waste looks at waste generation. It looks at water as a resource. It looks at the land as a resource, how multifunctional the land might be after the remediation, and the effects on landscape, as well as the obvious considerations of its resource and energy intensity and any potential for renewables. Within the social element, the first one is obvious. Society is made of people. So we look at human health and safety in terms of risks to people around the site, risks to people who are working on the site, risks from processes, but also benefits such as public health gains. Ethics and equity, this is something that technical people find quite difficult to come to terms with, but this relates to things like the polluter pays principle, making sure that there's intergenerational equity, so you're not simply postponing a problem for your children, and things like environmental justice. So I'll come back to that. Neighborhoods and locality, well, this is really sources of nuisance like traffic, dust, noise, but also gains and losses that they might have. So maybe they can gain some infrastructure, or maybe they lose something like public access. The fourth is community and community involvement. So how closely people might be engaged with a particular remediation process, but also how well the remediation choices link to policy and regulation at local, regional, and national levels. The bottom one here, uncertainty and evidence, this is also a tricky one. This is not about the sustainability assessment. We know that that's going to be uncertain. This is why we have a sensitivity analysis. This relates to the uncertainty and evidence for our remediation choices. So, for instance, often above ground treatments like soil separation are fairly well documented, and they're more easy to operate. Whereas a new technology like a phytoremediation, we might have less understanding of the technology, and it might be inherently more variable in the site. For example, depending on how plants' rooting zone develops. The fifth block, the economic block, the first is the usual suspects, operating costs, capital costs, other costs like compliance costs, discharge and environmental liabilities. The second group, indirect economic costs and benefits, takes into account that a project can have positive and negative impacts in the wider community's economy. It's been found that some projects actually improve the value of housing around sites because the blight of the contaminated site has been removed. This is a good thing in one respect, but in another respect it can be a bad thing, a process called green gentrification. So what this describes is that an area has been improved, environmentally improved, and then the house values and the rents all go up, and the people who were living there can no longer live there. So there's an economic gain, but a social loss in ethics and equity. And you'll find this across a number of these indicators. There are pluses and minuses. There are winners and losers. The third element of the economic is employment and employment capital. Employment capital basically means skills and knowledge of the workforce. This fourth one, induced economic costs and benefits, this is quite tricky again. So if there's a new technology, then there might be an economic gain because the technology is demonstrated and then replicated more widely. And the final one comes to project lifespan and flexibility, or what in the USA is now called resilience. So how resilient would the project be to climate change? How resilient is it to an economic change? For example, the organization paying for the remediation goes bust. It talks about project risks, and it talks about the fitness for purpose of the solution. So what we've found is that this broad framework seems to work well for dozens of sites, if not hundreds of sites that it's been used on. It's also been used on projects related to waste recycling, and I'm even involved in a project for zoos, which is using this indicator network.
Hang on, Paul.
Check it.
Anybody has any doubt or want some clarification in these categories? Because they are really very important, and some of them may not be quite obvious for you, because you're going to play with this. So it's very nice that you have a kind of a good understanding of the meaning of them. Yeah,
I'll drill down into them as well, boss. But if anyone's got immediate questions, please go ahead.
Yes, okay. My name is Anna. I wanted to ask why the ecology is the separated line on environment categories.
Why is it a separate line?
Yes.
Because we're trying to break out criteria and group them in a way to make sure that everybody who uses the checklist is giving the most complete sustainability assessment. So within that ecology group, we're looking at things like habitat and diversity, ecosystem services, direct impacts on important wildlife. So, for example, noise, visual intrusion, and also measures that you might add to improve ecology. We don't have those criteria anywhere else in the sustainability assessment. So while emissions to air can have an impact on ecology, and the soil and ground conditions, there is a soil ecology, we separate out this row on ecology to make sure that there is a deep consideration of that group of criteria within the sustainability assessment. Does that answer your question, Anna?
Yeah, thank you.
Along these lines, Paul, let me ask you one, following up what I asked. Is it not the case that you could spread or separate natural resources from waste? Or are you thinking that waste will definitely impact the natural resources by means of land use to make a repository?
Absolutely, you could. This is a man-made, well, man and woman-made categorization, and you can split the categories in many different ways, and you can organize your checklist in many different ways, as long as you make sure you have a complete coverage of issues that are important to sustainability. It doesn't really matter how you organize it. We've simply organized it this way for convenience, and because in our heads, waste relates to discarded resources, so they're kind of related in that way.
Thank you. So would you agree with me that this serves as a guidance, but people can play with those categories and these groupings the way they see fit, provided that they have a good rationale for doing this?
Absolutely, and we'll come to that. That's absolutely correct.
Thank you. Let's move on.
So, I showed you this flow diagram earlier, and the indicators are basically coming into that part. So, you define the indicators, or the criteria as they'll become, that you use before you do the assessment. It's important that you define things in advance and you don't change things too much as you go along, because there may be many people involved in the sustainability assessment and it will just become very confusing and create a lot of arguments. So it's a very good idea to do your framing in advance so that there is a coherent approach. Now, you can revisit this, of course. It could be that someone you speak to says, well, I'm sorry, but you haven't got this ecological criterion in. We have a very rare species of bat here, and you haven't thought about it. And then you'd have to say, oh my God, no, we didn't think about that. Okay, then we'll have to add that in to our scope. And that's not unusual. So I was involved with the sustainability assessment on a mercury impacted site. And for the emissions to air, the stakeholders wanted a specific criterion for methyl mercury. So they didn't want it included in a general criterion for ground air quality. They wanted something specific. So it is a checklist and a guideline. It's not the 10 Commandments. I wanted to say also something about this idea of lines of evidence. So in a qualitative sustainability assessment, we're ranking options. Now, if we rank options 1, 3, 2, that's just whether they're winning the gold, silver, or bronze medal. They could win, as we're all very upset in the UK about breaststroke, they could win the gold medal by 20 milliseconds, but they still won the gold medal, and the next guy only gets a silver. So the ranking doesn't convey scale, it's just position. And we might base this on quantitative evidence, like carbon footprint, on a technical rationale, and we might support that by citations to technical literature. Other rationales, so for example, if there's a loss of amenity, public amenity on a site, then we would have to support this on the basis of anecdotal information. Or we could collect opinions in the survey. Or this might be combinations. So for instance, we know that if you expand green space in an urban area, the research shows that there's a positive correlation with public health benefits. As I mentioned before, some stakeholders don't like rankings because it's just a position. They want a score. So they want to know that the first one, I don't know, is scoring 100%, and then the next nearest one is 70%. It's important to them. And they also might want to weight these options because they might feel that some indicators are more important than others. So for instance, they might say, well, we want a very high weighting for indicators related to greenhouse gas emissions, and we're only going to give a very low importance to the indicator related to the back population that I mentioned earlier. For quantitative sustainability assessment, there are very few methods that cover the whole scope of sustainability. You could do a cost-benefit assessment, in which case you have to be very careful to include all of the relevant externalities as your costs, because cost-benefit assessment tends to be quite narrow. Another tool that you could use is something called social return on investment. And if you Google that, you'll find out what it is. But basically, it's a means of understanding through surveys of communities what they feel a social benefit is worth. It's very important to note that sustainability is site and even project specific. So if we were to look at these effects or indicators, they might be environmental, economic, or social. Some are subjective, like the value of a landscape. Some are objective, more or less, like a carbon footprint, although people might disagree how objective a carbon footprint is. So you already have subjectivity, and that means that it's going to be specific to the stakeholders around the site. And then for each case, some of these criteria are going to be more affected by the site, and very few are generally related to a technique. So it's almost impossible to say, as a general rule, technique X is more sustainable than technique Y, because sustainability is so related to the site. And even the site-related ones, some are purely related to the site. For example, its distance from population centers. So it's really important to recognize that sustainability assessment is specific to the site and the project and the people who are involved. So that means that you must be very transparent and rigorous in how you report the sustainability assessment because otherwise it's not meaningful to anybody else. I mentioned before this idea of iteration and taking things in stages. So generally it's sensible to have your first iteration with a small team, site owner, consultant, and this small team tries to consider what the views of other stakeholders might be, what the uncertainties might be, and it provides a first straw man, or Aunt Sally, or God, I don't know if those colloquial terms mean anything, a first draft rather than a blank piece of paper. And then you consult with that to wider stakeholders. This could be in a detailed way, or it could be in a summary way, depending on the level of knowledge of the stakeholders you're talking to. You might do that in bilateral conversations. So this is something that could be very helpful, particularly for non-expert stakeholders. Or you might be able to do it with several stakeholders around the table. For instance, the local authority and the regulator, they might be quite technical, and you can just put the whole sustainability assessment on the table and discuss it with them together. The benefit of these iterations is it tests your rationales and lines of evidence. It validates the scope of sustainability that you're considering, the approach that you're taking, and it expands your evidence base. And it demonstrates that this is a participatory sustainability assessment, which means that it's more robust. People can't say, well, this is only based on an opinion of 2 or 3 people. You can say, well, no, it's actually based on the opinion of a lot of people, and that can help improve its acceptability. So I'm going to just show you how these 15 categories, going back to the checklist, are expanded out. We'll pick this one, and within the guidance, the SR2 that I mentioned to you, the guidance offers a detailed description of what's meant in the headline. I'm not going to propose to read this because we're short of time. And then it shows you what are the 3 subcategories that we've included in this. You don't have to use all of these subcategories. You can add subcategories if you think that something's missing. But this checklist is giving you these 3 individual considerations as a starting point. And we then give you some ideas for the types of evidence that you might use to support a ranking. And we also have taken some time to show how the Surf UK criteria map to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that's what's in the SR2 guidance. Coming back to the point that Horst made, it's just a checklist, and you need to consider it first. Which are the criteria that are relevant for your site? And are you confident that all stakeholders would share this opinion? So it's usually safer to include something than to exclude something. And it could be that there's something novel that's not mentioned in this checklist. So this Surf UK checklist is absolutely silent about anything to do with nuclear sites, because that was never in its scope. So you would have to add that in. And then you document your considerations. You record why and the explanation, why you've excluded indicators or why you've included indicators. And you might want to then refine them as you finalize this. Perhaps you can make it a bit more specific to your case. And also say what lines of evidence you're going to use to support your ranking or scoring. And please, if there's a novel feature that's not mentioned in the SURF UK guidance, add the criterion. It's just a mind map that we're offering. We're not offering a set of laws, it's just a mind map. You can get these reports that I've mentioned. Report 1 is about sustainability assessment methodology, and report 2 is about the indicators. And there's also a paper in a journal called the Remediation Journal that describes the rationale. Why did we pick these indicators? And you can download those all for free. I also want to mention a book which I've written, just taken about 4 years so far, which goes through the whole process of sustainable and risk-based land management. And it describes the concept, stakeholders, the idea of using a conceptual site model, which is a really good underpinning discipline for any remediation work, site investigation, risk assessment, risk management, bringing in sustainable remediation. Then there's a chapter which lists about 24 different remediation options, and then a chapter on implementation. Again, it's focused on conventional contamination rather than radionuclides. So the idea of the book is to provide this information in a short and coherent narrative, maybe a few hundred pages maximum, that's supported by real-life case studies. And I'm seeking to find sponsors, so this book can be very cheap on Amazon. And we hope that it will educate and inform students, early career stage practitioners, professionals from other backgrounds looking for contaminated sites knowledge, and also experienced professionals. And our vision is to advance international practice for all stakeholders, regardless of their economic circumstances. I'm hoping this is going to be on Amazon by the end of the year, but I have to tell you it's a huge work. We're looking at about 20 case studies. It's been peer reviewed. There will be, by closure, 1,000 citations in the book. There will be a supporting website with training materials. I'm hoping that it will be updated in 5 years' time. It's available so far in English and Chinese. So, whilst I've taken quite a lot of time here, and I'm going to ask your advice, because I don't know if these slides are on the server for people to use, but basically, for each 15 categories, I have a slide here that is going through them in detail. I can go through these slides quite quickly, or we can go straight to the exercise. What would you suggest?
Paul, this is Giuseppe. I'll be for a moment out of the room. I think yes, it is on they have the list. But yeah, it is been uploaded. So from this point of view, no problem.
Do you think, Giuseppe, or can you ask people if they would like to just look at the list as they're doing the exercise, or would they like me to go through it now? Maybe another quarter of an hour.
Yeah, quarter of an hour more, and he will go through the list, or
you can do it yourselves, really the exercise. So hands up, who wants to go now?
now?
Continue.
Yeah.
Maybe we can stop for 1 second just to ask other questions.
Okay. So, Paul, the idea is maybe to have a coffee break now, and then you go through the list and continue, because they need the break.
I bet they do.
Okay.
So, so this is instead of the coffee break later, you want to have the coffee break now. We'll go through the list and go into the exercise straight,
yeah.
one after the other.
Yeah, this is the idea. It's okay by you?
That's good for me because I could use a coffee too.
Okay.
How long?
How long do you need?
10 minutes?
15, 10?
Let's start there. 15.
Okay. The agreement was 15 minutes. It's okay by you?
Of course.
Okay, great. So see you again in 15 minutes.
Yes, I'm going to leave everything open because I'm frightened if I close the connection there might be some disaster.
No. Yeah. Keep everything online.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. See you soon. So 3:15, please.
No, 10 past. 10 past.
She's stricter than I.
Okay, 3:10.
maybe you can leave this for Thursday morning? Because there's nothing for Thursday morning.
Because at this point,
Or you know what?
we don't have problem.
Yeah, but so Thursday we could split it into Thursday do whatever they do with the consensus ceremony and blah, and then maybe you can do some practice and the first thing in the afternoon because they probably will not use any time by
Wait,
then.
what we do on Thursday at this point, because
Nothing. There's nothing planned. It's just
yeah, exactly. But then, if tomorrow is doing
then it's you with the presentation of today.
yes, then there is, and then we can give them more
Yeah, for the rest of the day.
of the day.
I know, but I still have a presentation.
Yeah.
The application.
Because if I do the multi-criteria, no, the date is tomorrow, yes.
But you do the information here, then this, and then I can do the application here.
But then, because
And
we have
move
Thursday,
this,
we have Thursday
we move
morning.
this Thursday. Or we move both the
We can-
application and the tools. to
Exactly, we
Thursday
can move everyone to
Let's see.
multi-criteria on Thursday morning.
morning. Let's see how
So
it
you do the overall case studies, then I do the software test, because
They can be more interactive with them and ask them their opinions.
no, because if they had known this, then tomorrow morning is I do information, then there will be Christina, then we can give the result of the case study. We can think, then on Thursday morning we do the case.
Isn't it too much? Information for a group one, but we can also have coffee break here after Christina, and then we can have some group work activities, and we can finish the definition early.
I would say it's up to them, because otherwise they don't have any time to do the good work. And they have to present on Friday.
They also need time to prepare the
Yeah.
presentation.
So they can work after Christina, they can make some good work on time, then they want to do our presentation based on the Socrates, and then they want the rest of the day for group work and presenting.
Also, we were talking about something else. We slowly interacting with the shadows and all these things, especially the awakening and but the concept. Oh, okay.
No, no.
But okay, we will correct.
Are you good? Thank you for the question. But are you finding it interesting? Are you finding
Yes,
it more interesting? Sure.
Like a niche.
What is your background?
Ecologist.
Apologies. Of course, that's very well.
Yes, I also wanted to all of
But you need to listen more. I can see that you're very critical, very bright. Don't be shy. You need to challenge us because you're very much confident about what you know, but maybe we are all wrong. Honestly. You know that we are so positive.
I'm here because I'm here.
No, because of you. I said,
Exactly.
because
It's
of
opposite.
because of the
Second.
the Russians present. Yes, when the present condition is there, the current conditions, the first practice of the final the host.
Yes.
Then we have communication about it. Good. Stick. No, it's not me, but you represent. Whatever words we need to be prepared for improvisation. Oh, RSLS is not mine. RSLS is safe.
Just a minute, I have to go
So we can do also another thing. Because at this, yeah, like we can have all the particulars here start from the
Yes.
introduction is started.
I leave it up to you.
And it is but I think it would be better to do the introduction because then they already have a way of thinking about the systems and the structure. Or I don't know.
Exactly, leave it as it is. Leave it as it is and just push things back. After everything before works. You need a good because we have a practical example.
If we just push, I should present the this today, in the introduction.
And we can fit him somewhere here.
Then he can be instead of me.
Then we do the other
And
remaining part on the third.
since as the morning is free, we do the remaining part. First cabinet, he started.
Perfect. Perfect. Done. We will inform. You have authority over ask her to quit.
It's a voluntary choice.
No?
And I cannot
It's
against her
pressure from the
autonomy.
society. And this lady from Hungary also is in the band.
Company. It's the social interaction. Social norms are very important for behavior, and also what you see other people doing and what you think that they are doing.
Because one man
It's a
forced
great
the world.
predictor for
You know how economics works. Now, what do you think the other people are thinking? So,
How do you compare this one with the one in the United States? I think this one is the one in the US, I need to defer that to Karen. This one. Pardon? No. No, not. before we go back to Paul, some information which is good and bad at the same time. Oh, she's looking at me like, what's coming on? So, first of all, I heard that there were some discussions about the exercise in the bar, in the hotel yesterday. Is that true? There were some good discussions in the bar. That's good. That's good. So the point is, we won't have the field trip on Thursday morning. So what we are doing, we are rearranging the agenda so that things are cascading. And the idea is to have the afternoon of Friday free so that you can enjoy Yerevan, which is a very nice city, a lot of things to do. So I know that some of you will have early or late flights. I don't know how to say that, but you'll not have time for resting. And if we finish very late or in the planned time on Friday, we'd have less time to enjoy. So I think it's a bad news because we don't have the site visit. But it's a good news because we have more time to work in the exercise, in the lectures, but also we try to make Friday just a half period, okay? And then I want your help from my Russian colleagues to connect with Mikhail Litvinov to ask him to make his presentation on the approach that are being used in the CIS countries on remediation. That includes a lot of sustainable development goals and sustainability conservation under a very Russian perspective. So that will be the presentation that he will be doing. But then we need to explain that. Yeah, okay? So this is it. Paul, are you ready? Born ready, right?
I don't know why I was born these days, Horst.
So,
3 children.
the floor is yours, Paul. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, this is basically the checklist that I'm going to run through really quickly. That you will then use in the exercise part of the afternoon. Anna, you were asking about the ecology, and this will kind of show you a bit better about the spread of ecological considerations across this checklist.
But Anna said that I discovered why she asked, because she's an ecologist.
Ah, okay. Well, there are worse things to be in life. She could be a Trump supporter. Sorry, bad joke. And coming back to what you said, Horst, some people would take a completely different way of grouping categories. So in the Surf UK checklist, we have climate change, greenhouse gases as a subcategory for emissions to air. Another jurisdiction might say, well, no, the climate change has got to be a special category all of its own. So it's up to you how you want to group or use your checklist, and you're very welcome to develop out our suggestions from Surf UK, but this is how we've cut the cake. So the green emissions to air would be the greenhouse gases, NOx and SOx, nitrogen and sulfur oxides, things to do with ground air quality, and in particular particulates, but also ground level ozone, volatile contaminants such as chlorinated, even things like ammonia, which might come from ex situ bioremediation. And the fourth block is ozone depleting substances. It's a starting point. So the second block, then the soil and ground conditions. Actually, Anna, the first one here is ecology as well. This is to do with changes in soil functionality. You may be aware that soil health is now a very big policy driver in the European Union. So it could be that these indicators would need to change to better reflect this. Changes in how the soil filters water, soil erosion, the surface structure, particularly what we call sealing of the site, so where you put a hard surface on top of the soil so water no longer drains through it. You may have structures in the subsurface. These might be historic and not used, but there might be quite important current structures in there, like buried services, electricity, fiber optic cables, changes in the geotechnical properties, and in some areas the site itself might have a special geological interest. So triple SI, that's a UK term, that means a site of special scientific interest. And some of our former mining sites have actually become geoparks because they have such an interesting geology in them. I'm not going to go through every single sub-criterion, I think, or we'll be here all day. But the third group, which is groundwater and surface water, this is related to really the functioning of the aquifer, and it also relates to some areas where you might have a coastal or a marine location, so it picks that up as well. Something that's been quite important on some areas in the UK is flood management and surface water management. A potential beneficial use of restored land is that it becomes what we call a flood meadow, a water meadow. So in times of high rainfall, this land absorbs water in its vegetation. So that prevents and reduces impacts on urban areas downstream. Fourth block I've already mentioned is ecology, which I went through. Horst, you were talking about natural resources and waste, and we have 4 criteria within here. The land as a resource, so the circular use of land. Then something about energy, and then primary resources, and essentially waste generation we link to primary resources. And then water as a resource. So these are the 5 environmental blocks. They're actually very similar to the green remediation descriptors that the US EPA developed. And that wasn't deliberate, it just happened that way. Then for society, our 5 groups are human health and safety, and within that there's the risk management performance of the project, obviously. But we also have to consider risks to the people who are working on the site or neighbouring the site and the public during restoration. And these risks could be substantive, for example, through emissions of volatile contaminants. But we'd also have to take into account the excavation and machinery that's used on the site. In fact, the risk to site workers from excavation machinery is typically 1 death in 10,000, and this is a much higher risk than is generally accepted for contamination, which would be 1 in 100,000 or 1 in a million. So an argument that's sometimes put forward is not to remediate because you're going to kill more people than you would by doing the remediation. It doesn't quite work in that way. Some remediation processes do use hazardous reagents, like hydrogen peroxide, and others use heat. Some remediation processes generate new risks. So bioremediation above ground in biopiles. These are typically colonized by fungal species like Aspergillus fumigatus. And when you then dismantle the pile, you create bioaerosols and fungal allergens, which might be hazardous. And of course, if you're doing things like screening on site, then you could be generating dust emissions. But there can be a plus side, so there may be some positive impacts on human health and well-being, for example, by providing a green path for people, or because people are less concerned, because they're now in a cleaner area. On the flip side, people can get very anxious, as I mentioned before, because they're worried about the release of contaminants. I mentioned odor, but there are some contaminants that people really dread, that people are really frightened of, and radionuclides would be a dread contaminant. Ethics and equity, how well the polluter pays principle is upheld. I assume you know about this principle. This is the idea that the person who caused the pollution ideally should be the person who pays for it, to clean up. The second one is to do with environmental justice, whether the impacts, benefits of work are fairly distributed. So do you remember the gas works that I told you about? And that the neighbours were getting very distressed by the odour and they felt it was making them sick. They were also disconnected from the project in terms of benefits. So the people who were benefiting from the project were the site owners and the developers who were going to sell the site for housing. And the people around the site were disadvantaged communities. They were economically disadvantaged. They were what we call in the UK BAME, Black, Asian, minority. And they were getting none of the benefit. And they felt they were getting all of the pain. So for them, this was a really big problem. I've mentioned this idea also, green gentrification, that you clean an area up and then the people who were living there originally can no longer afford to live there. This idea of intergenerational equity is quite significant. I mean, the idea of sustainability is that we want to hand over a planet to our children where we've dealt with the problems that we've caused and our ancestors have caused. So if we're moving contamination from one location to a landfill in another location, this isn't solving a problem, it's just moving it for a future generation to deal with. In this category also, there might be quite a lot of supply chain considerations. So this is very important for many projects, that the materials that they use are sustainably procured, that the business ethics of the providers are clear. So, for instance, if they're using geomembrane fabric, that this fabric was not produced by child labour in Bangladesh, as a very blunt example. And then there may be ethical concerns for some stakeholders. So in Europe, it's almost impossible to use a bioremediation that involves genetically modified organisms because people are concerned about it. People are also concerned about nanoparticles and nanoremediation. So these concerns play into this group. The third group, neighbourhood and localities, well, the first is quite obvious, it's the nuisance. But there can also be some benefits. So I've had some involvement with a former waste site near Liverpool. And this was a covered landfill, and it was used by people to do informal racing of what are called dirt bikes, or for drug taking. And when the site was reclaimed, these antisocial activities ceased. So this was seen as a benefit to the local community. It's also worth considering, particularly in some of the countries like Jordan, for instance, what the impacts of the remediation are on the built environment. There might be issues of architectural conservation. So another gas works in Budapest, the buildings were historic buildings. So they had to treat the site without damaging that historic architectural fabric. And something that occurs a lot in the UK, as well as maybe other countries, is that we need to conserve archaeological resources that may be buried on the site. There could be gains also, improvements in facilities and services. For example, as a result of reclaiming a former nuclear site, there's a new road built in an area. The fourth group is about community and community involvement, and this is about how a project changes the way a community functions and the service they can access. So there might be gains and losses. Maybe people like walking their dogs on a piece of brownfield land, and they won't be able to when it's been restored as a more formal public park. Or maybe there is no public park. So in Kosovo, there are 3 municipalities very closely connected. Pristina, Obilic in another one, but Pristina is the capital. And there's virtually no green space. And in between them is this huge area around coal mining and energy production. So producing a public park there could be a real asset for the local community. The third one is to do with preservation of local heritage. So it could be that a site you're involved with has a special significance. So you need to be conscious about that. And the fourth is to do with how well your approach fits in with what the local, regional and national policies are for environment and also for spatial planning. I mentioned this one in a bit more detail before, but this is to do with uncertainty and evidence. The robustness and rigor that we have for the information for each option considered. Some remediations, for instance, pump and treat, a lot is known about them. But for others, for instance, nanoremediation, much less is known about them. Some options differ in their intrinsic levels of uncertainty. So, monitored natural attenuation, because it operates over such large areas, might be more of a certain process to apply than something called air sparging, which is intrinsically known to be difficult to apply because of the heterogeneities in the subsurface. Third part of this is what the regulator requires to validate, verify, or sign off on remediation. And you can forget the fourth one. This is a UK specific thing. For the economical group, then the direct costs and benefits, this is what is usually on the balance sheet. What is it going to cost for the remediation? What are we going to get in terms of, say, the uplift in site value? Are there any other costs associated with it? For instance, long-term monitoring, regulatory costs. Do we have to pay for permits or licenses? Do we have to pay for debt financing? And then on the other side, under international accounting rules, you have to set out your environmental liabilities. So you might be able to discharge those environmental liabilities when you remediate the site, so your balance sheet changes. You might then also be able to carry out a corporate divestment more easily. So there's also indirect costs and benefits. The first one, allocation of financial resources internally. If you imagine you were a local authority and you were faced with an orphan site that you had to remediate, and then the cost of those options might be really important to you, because if you take a more expensive option, then you might have less money to spend in your school's budget. There can be changes to surrounding land property values. That park in Liverpool that I mentioned, they did, University of Manchester did an economic survey around that park, and they found a 10% uplift for all the houses that were around the park. Of course, you could also cause damage to surrounding properties. And an example of that is a pernicious weed that we have quite widespread in North America and Western Europe. It's called Japanese knotweed. It's very difficult to treat, and even a small amount, less than a gram, can regenerate a whole new infestation. And we tend to move soil between sites. So we want to reuse the soil, so we move it. But if we move the soil and it's still contaminated with this Japanese knotweed, then essentially we're damaging the site that it goes to and could be sued for that. Another indirect cost benefit is your corporate reputation, your brand. You might have also important benefits for an area's economic performance. So coming back to this example in Kosovo, this park, there are lots of ideas around that park on making a performance area, a local craft market, local cafes for people walking in the park. So these are all important economic uplifts. And then there may also be tax implications. So that 10% uplift in property around the park in Liverpool also makes the local authority very happy, because one of the taxations is based on local property values. The employment and employment capital, well, the first two bullets are very similar, but they're there for different reasons. So if you imagine again this park in Kosovo, then there's quite a lot of potential for job creation, from leisure and amenity and all of these little local businesses that set up. In some cases, a big brownfields project is set up by a local authority specifically to boost employment levels. So we had a big program of coal mine closures in the UK, and one of these pits, called Markham, very large pit in Yorkshire, the local authorities invested a lot of money to create alternative employment on the mine area. So they're restoring the area and they're creating new jobs. So for them, an important criterion might be looking at the short-term employment benefits from the restoration process, but also their long-term targets, maybe of generating thousands of jobs. Another part of this other skills that people gain from doing remediation projects, which might make them more employable and more valuable in other locations. And of course, there could also be opportunities for education and training, local schools and universities. So the organisation that carried out the Liverpool part of Land Trust, a big part of their mission is engaging with local schools to make small environmental and ecological projects for them. And this is a benefit. And then this induced costs and benefits. The first one is because you've cleaned up an area, maybe someone else gets interested in improving a next door site. So the park in Liverpool, this bordered a river called the Mersey, which the Beatles sang about, and people could then walk along and look at this landscape that the Beatles sang about. It became very popular. So somebody else decided to restore a derelict building that was next to the park. So that was an inward investment. For a new technology, I don't know, a phyto or a nano project, it can be really beneficial for a technology provider to demonstrate their technology in a project. And of course, for yourselves, while you're in this room, you will gain, your organization will gain in its capacity for innovation as a result of being in more advanced remediation projects. And then the last one, the resilience one, I'm sorry this has taken so long. The first bullet here is about the duration of the remediation benefit. So for instance, if you are doing a pump and treat on a site to manage a groundwater problem, once you switch the pump and treat off, the problem's back. Pump and treat isn't dealing with the source, it's only dealing with the pathway. So that has a limited duration. On the other hand, if you were looking at a biodegradation that actually destroyed the contaminants, the effect is permanent. So you pick that up in this bullet. The next one then is to do with project risks. The third bullet is very common in remediation projects, that you find something you didn't expect. Site investigations are never 100% good. There's always a chance of finding a new buried tank, and some technical approaches can deal with that better than others. There may also be, particularly in your countries, a need for a remediation plan to be able to respond to changing regulation. So as a, for instance, in Kosovo, they do have a contaminated sites legislation, but it's not very well elaborated. So it's quite possible that they may borrow some money from the World Bank to improve the way in which they manage their sites, and in that case, the remediation demands from the regulator may be different. So when we're looking at this public park near Pristina, we have to think about the regulatory situation now and where we think it might be in the future. The next two bullets are to do with the resilience to climate change. So in America, this is a huge issue because now they have much more flooding. So the remediation needs to be resilient to flood risks. We have the same in the UK actually on a smaller scale. And also thinking about the robustness of a solution to changing economic circumstances. So the case study I'll finish with is in Czech Republic. And that looked at an engineered wetland versus a wastewater treatment plant. If the money ran out, the wastewater treatment plant is stopped and the pollution is back. For the engineered wetland, if the money runs out, there's kind of a buffer period when it will work on its own for a while until an alternative funding source can be found. So that's the end of this one. I'm going to put the other slide deck up, the exercise. But I wanted first to invite any questions. And since I've spoken for such a long time on this first slot, I wanted to discuss with Horst what he thinks my best use of time would be for the remaining hour and a quarter.
I think that the exercise will be pretty good because it will help the participants to put in practice the things you, or think about the things you just mentioned. So I think we should go to the exercise.
In the worst case, Horst, I can try and make some time available on Thursday, or I think the case study is fairly self-explanatory and I can just circulate the slides.
But what you're suggesting that we do?
Well, what I'm suggesting is, if we need the time on the exercise, I could just circulate the slides for the case study.
Okay, that's fine.
So, do you want to have a few minutes for questions or go straight to the exercise? Or does anyone need?
Yeah, this is what I was about to ask. Any clarification you need? Any questions? No, people seem to be eager to go to the exercise.
I can't see everyone anymore. Is everyone still awake, Horst, or have I sent people to sleep?
More or less they are.
Oh.
No, the screen is frozen, but we can see you quite well.
Okay. Do you want me to turn the camera off?
For the exercise?
No, just if there's a problem with
No,
the
no,
bandwidth.
no, no. No, it was working until now.
Okay.
You think you can go ahead?
Okay. Only thing we're waiting for now is my slow speed of show.
It's working now, I guess. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
working.
It's my slow speed of keys.
So eventually what we can do is that we sit close together with the groups that were formed so that you can already discuss the exercise together and get to know each other thinking. Maybe that's a good idea.
How many groups are there, Horst?
5.
5. Okay. So while I'm getting started, I don't mind if
The original groups.
you
Let the original
tell-
groups get together.
while people are getting together,
Yeah, they are getting together. Come on.
and
Move.
I want 2 groups to start with the environment, 2 groups to start with social, and 1 group to start with economics.
Okay.
And the idea is that they get through as much as they can.
So you want 2 groups. We start with social.
2 with economic, and 1 with 2 environmental, 2 social, 1 economic.
So 2 environmental, 2 social, and 1 economic. So group 1 and group 2 will be doing environmental. Group 3 and 4 will be doing social, and group 5 will be doing economic. Okay? Huh? I don't know. How much time do you think we need to allocate for the exercise, for the groups?
I'm just coming to that, and
Okay.
I think we will have to change it. So,
They will need to report to you, right?
I think we report
Yeah,
to
that's
each
good.
other. So
That's
this
good.
was my original timeline, but I don't think we've got the time for this. So this is taking This is taking this is taking an hour and a half. Without, this is taking
We are good. We are good. We are good.
2 hours.
2 hours?
So I think, yeah, we need to cut some time.
15, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour. Well, but then we would.
If people maybe take their coffee while they're doing their group working.
Or Paul, what do you think if the groups do only one category of indicators and then they can report to you?
I think that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I will try and reduce that 15 plus 15. I'll try and reduce that to like to 20, and then maybe just 15 minutes of group working, and just see what is it. The whole point is just for you to do something yourselves and get. When the group working starts, you and we can discuss how to close it.
Yeah, let's keep the original plan because it doesn't matter that we will have to represent. So 1 and 2 environmental, 3 and 4 social, and 5 economic, right? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. But I will have a hard stop at 5 p.m. That's my problem.
No problem. We do as much as we can. If you cannot finish, we can discuss over here.
Okay.
Okay? Let's get it done.
Okay.
We have to use the template.
You have to use
So
what?
I'm going to start.
Let's see what he will present.
Go ahead, Horst.
Go ahead, you.
I'm going to start with a little example. Well, not little actually, it's quite a big concept. And just pick out some benefits. And that will be what I'm looking for you to do. I'm looking for you to identify in your exercise for Horst's for the site scenario that Horst has set up. My wife's asking me my wife's texting me to ask me what I want for lunch, which is really, really kind of her. So, as I'm quite hungry, I'm finding that distracting. So, what I would like you to do in your groups is to think about these different technical options, what their gains and losses might be, and even if you can rank them. So the example I'm going to start with is the sustainable reuse of soils. Soil and aggregate being things like gravel, are primary resources. They're very valuable. They take thousands of years for soil, millions of years for aggregate to form. When we remove soil from one place to use somewhere else, or we extract virgin gravel, this removes land from agriculture, for instance. And the extraction and processing of the aggregate of soil causes environmental damage and has a lot of sustainability impacts. So, land and soil and aggregate are essentially non-renewable. And even Mark Twain identified this in the 19th century. He said, buy land, they are not making it anymore. So, in many European countries, there's a wish to move to a circular economy. So in this little diagram that you can see here, originally we'd have virgin materials that were dug out of a hole in the ground, and these would be used for construction and for building, and eventually the site is changed. And in the past, that material would just go to a landfill. And in fact, by volume, in Europe, the largest volume of waste is construction waste. But can we make this more of a circular economy, more of a cradle to cradle? So instead of looking at the excavated soil or demolition waste, demolition materials as waste, we take a mental shift from problem to opportunity, from waste to valuable raw material. So in this diagram, the circle should be growing and the material being reused. So the old soil and aggregate is reused in the new construction on the site. And that little road in the middle from virgin materials becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So essentially, we want to reduce the use of virgin resources and increase cradle to cradle for excavated soil and demolition wastes. And what might the benefits of this be? Well, think of the lorry movements that might be saved from the local reuse of materials. The improvement in air quality and the saving of carbon costs. And in terms of ground conditions, well, we're leaving that virgin site undisturbed. We are saving all that water that would otherwise be used to clean excavated virgin aggregate. We're not disturbing those excavation sites, we're leaving them for agriculture or habitat. We're preventing the reuse of waste, we're saving primary resources, and we're saving energy. In terms of social benefits, we're maintaining people's well-being because their natural landscape is being preserved. In terms of their neighborhoods, we are reducing traffic and nuisance. For direct economic costs, we're reducing disposal costs and reducing taxation and legal risks. We are developing a new industry that's underpinned by local enterprise and new businesses in the circular economy. We are expanding business know-how about materials management plans and sustainability. We are creating more robust and long-term durable business models. We have a flexible approach to the reuse of materials and standards to assure performance. We can make our approach verifiable, deal with concerns about uncertainty and evidence. In terms of equity, we're preserving resources and sites for future generations. So I'm going to be asking you to look at benefits and losses for your chosen segment, whether it's environment, social, or economic. I would like you to compare the remediation technologies that Horst has already introduced to you. Now, in the exercise that he gave you, he's talking about a site where there are industrial operations involved in the extraction and processing of an ore. that led to the generation of liquid effluents and solid residues containing natural radionuclides. So I'm not going to ask you to look at the whole of that picture, it's too much. So we're going to zoom in, and I'm just going to assume that Horst was imagining that there was a very large slag heap that had been deposited over 50 years as a result of this company's operating. And I'm going to imagine that it wasn't made very well, that it's uncontained, there's no containment underneath it or around it, and that the soil it is on is a sandy soil. It's next to a river that's being impacted by the contaminants coming out of the slag heap, and the groundwater table is quite shallow, and it's very hot and very wet. So you've got a short list of 4 remediation techniques you could use for dealing with that slag heap. You could remove the source, for instance, move it somewhere else. Let's say source removal to an off-site landfill. You could contain it. For instance, you could put a horizontal barrier underneath it and some slurry barriers around the outside. You could use some immobilization, come to that. Or you could use separation technology. Maybe there's something in that slag that's worth separating out. So I would like you to rank those 4 technologies on that site and say why you've ranked them that way. And group 1 and 2 will be looking at that first column, group 3 and 4 at the second column, and group 5 at the 5th column. If you finish your column, then I'm sure you don't want the coffee and you would like to stay and do more of the other columns. And what I would like is for each of the groups to report back to the whole meeting what their conclusions were, so that we can discuss them. Now you might ask, well, how do I rank? Well, let's make it really simple. Simply rank the best as 1, that's a gold medal. The next 2, that's a silver. 3 is the bronze, and 4 is your plastic. If 2 options are tied, then the next one, like 1, then the next one has to be 3. You need to find a consensus in your group. No. It could be that you can't. It could be that you have a huge argument. So if you can't agree, then tell us the majority view and what is the dissenting opinion. But in all cases, you need to explain your reasoning. So I'm just going to give one example for each column to start you off. And I don't want you to copy this, I want you to use your own heads. But first of all, let's look at emissions to air. And there were 4 things in that. Carbon emissions, climate change gases, acid rain, ground level air quality, and ozone depleting substances. So we might say, well, carbon emissions, well, that's definitely going to be relevant. Acid rain, well, it's a huge slag heap. There's going to be lots of diesel-powered diggers and generators and God knows what. So there'll be lots of sulfur and nitrogen oxides. And ground level air quality, well, that could be very relevant for some of the things where there's excavation. There could be a lot of dust, PM10, or even very hazardous dusts, PM 2.5. You might want to discuss, are we expecting there to be any asbestos? I mean, was it only slag that was dumped in that pile, or should we expect that there might be other nasty things in there too? I guess we could conclude that there's no ozone depleting substances, at least in the slag heap. So my first ranking, this is off the top of my head, but you need to do your homework. I'm going to rank immobilization first, containment second, and then third equal the separation and source removal. Why did I do it that way? Well, I've kind of used some imagination, and I'm hoping that you guys will as well. I've imagined that the immobilization process is basically grouting, so sealing the bottom of the slag heap, and then using some phytoremediation and biochar to stop the contaminants moving from the surface of the slag heap to the river. So I think that's really good because there's not a lot of vehicle movements for delivering things. There's a very small direct energy footprint. I've ranked containment second. I've imagined that that's going to be a slurry wall around the heap and an engineered cap, you know, a clay cap on top of the heap. I've ranked that second because there's going to be quite a lot of materials that's got to be imported, very big civil engineering works. And I've ranked the separation and source removal at the bottom because both of those are essentially talking about the dismantling and processing of the entire slag heap, either on or off site. So, in all of the scenarios, carbon, SOx, NOx, and ground air quality are correlated with the degree of use of the vehicles and machinery, and that's why I put immobilization at the top, because it has the least machinery input. You don't have to agree. You might say, well, containment's a lot worse. Where do those clays come from? Or what was the immobilization agent? You know, it might not be biochar. Well, actually, separation was anything of value in there. So that might then mean that you have to look at the criterion on natural resources and wastes. So Horst didn't write you 20 pages, he's just given you 2 or 3 pages, so you just use your imagination. There's no right or wrong answer, okay? We just want you to have a bit of fun using the indicators and discussing them and getting more comfortable with them. Now, the environment groups are probably the ones who will find it easiest because they'll be more familiar to them. The economic group, well, here was my go at the 4th criterion, induced economic costs and benefits. I looked at the 3 individual criteria in the SURF UK list. The first was creating opportunities for inward investment. So in my imagination, I thought, well, this is a remote site, so there's no opportunity here. So there is a question mark. I mean, maybe there's a value for the site as an eco-park. And I thought, well, there could be benefits to the technology provider, and there could be benefits for the organisation in terms of innovation. So my ranking, I put immobilization at the top and everything else second equal. Why did I rank that way? Well, this immobilization and grouting at the bottom with biochar and vegetation on the surface, I'm imagining this is a brand new approach that's being conceptualized at a local university by a team there, and there's a significant input from local technology partners, and that the potential for this low-cost approach is absolutely enormous in low middle income countries. So that looks like a really good opportunity for induced economic costs and benefits. And I'm imagining that all of the other options would be pretty much reliant on imported consultancy expertise. You don't have to agree. What are the guarantees? I mean, will it work? What's the resilience? And how well will things work? Maybe that ranking is the right one for induced economic costs and benefits, but immobilization performs much worse under flexibility and adaptability and under uncertainty. So the other thing to bear in mind is that when you make this ranking, you focus with a laser-like intensity on that indicator. You might then get into another argument, a side argument. Well, I don't think this immobilization is going to be effective because we don't know very much about it. Okay, that's a good argument, but it's not for this indicator. That belongs in the indicator on uncertainty. So, the social column, one that I picked was ethics and equity. And I looked at this idea of compliance with the polluter pays. And I've imagined that this is an orphan site. So the government is going to have to pay because there's no company. But actually, that's fair enough because the government owns the company. So all of the options, all the remediation options are ranking the same here. So I've discounted it. They're all going to be one. But there could be questions of environmental and social justice, intergenerational equity, and there could be ethical concerns because of this big worry that people might have over radionuclides. So I went through all of those, and actually I ended up ranking them all the same. Why did I do that? And again, you're free to disagree. This is just an exercise, an example. Well, I imagine that for all options, there's a fantastic environmental social justice benefit, because I'm imagining that this was a location that was an ancient hunting ground for some disadvantaged local first citizen community, thinking about like it was in Canada or something like that. But that doesn't really work with the subtropical. So you can see I was getting a bit confused. But the immobilization option was the best for them because it had the least nuisance from the operations and they were least frightened of it. And they could actually be involved in that process because they were going to be the people planting phytoremediation. So the immobilization was best here. But the problem is, for that option, and also for containment, the contamination is remaining in the ground, it's remaining in the slag heap. The slag heap doesn't move, so is that postponing a burden to a future generation? Or can we say that that burden is removed because no one would ever have the money to dig up the slag heap? So for generations, that slag heap will be there, and the best we can do is to contain it. So the stakeholders, i.e. me, we couldn't agree a clear ranking, so that's why we ranked it as 1. You don't have to agree with me. Maybe you might make another conclusion. You might say, crikey, that separation or source removal, this is making a huge climate gas impact. I know that we're counting it under emissions to air, but isn't it also passing on a burden to our children because they will have to deal with the carbon that's then in the atmosphere? So there isn't a right answer. There's just going to be an answer that you agree for this specific site and project as the stakeholders in your individual groups. So I'd like you to go through as many of the headlines as you can, at least the 5 that's in your column. And somebody in each group at the very start needs to volunteer or be volunteered to be the note taker so you can be the rapporteur in the report back session. So that is now over to you. Horst, can I pass back to you? And if I take the screen off, and you can put the camera on if anyone's got questions.
Yep. Oh, the camera is on?
Okay.
No. Again, not on. So, any need for clarification? Yeah? Go ahead. What do you want to know?
Some more information on technologies.
I can't hear, sorry.
So, is it possible to have more information on each technology?
I knew someone was going to ask me that question, and unfortunately, Horst and I were far too lazy to give you a full specification on the technology. So in your groups, you can imagine it. Unless Horst wants to give a brief technology specification now.
So
my idea was that that's actually part of the interest for you, is that you all have different backgrounds, so you could imagine the technology. I know that makes the reporting session a bit more complicated, but it could be fun.
So,
what else do you want?
sorry, on the, hello?
I got you.
Hello? On the technologies, we have 4 groups that I mentioned to you, and in the Microsoft Teams, you had more details about them, right? But source removal, if you have a pile of slag, we can also, instead of slag, think about any waste. Okay, just let me make it more generic. So source removal is to move this away from where it is and place in another place, in another location. Source containment, for example, we can think about some engineering barriers that you would put underneath so that avoid infiltration to the groundwater, or if you also want to put as I mentioned some sort of curtains,
like a slurry wall around
walls around to avoid this movement of lateral fluxes. Immobilization, you can think about some capping of the material, right? Over the pile. And separation, you can think about exploring the possibility of removing something that is relevant in the pile, in the waste. We talked about this today, depending on what would be there. But you can speculate about what could be. Remember that we are talking about raw material. We're talking about ore that contain uranium and thorium radionuclides from the series of uranium-238 and thorium-232. It's not any material, it is raw material that might contain radionuclides from the uranium-238 and thorium-232 series. So that gives already a clear hint for what kind of things might be there. And we discussed something like this morning, right? If you remember that presentation I made on the tech talk of the IAEA. That's a good hint. Any other question? Is it clear what you're gonna have to do? Yeah? Yeah? Yes or no? You need to tell me. Okay, so as Paul indicated, there will be a need for somebody in the group to report the results, but it's not just to give a straight answer. You need to defend your point of view and tell why you came to that particular consideration under the 3 dimensions that we are discussing: the environmental, the social, and the economic ones. So you need to see all the important implications under these criteria that Bo just gave to you. Okay, is that right, Bo?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I lost the screen. Got too many screens open. That's exactly right.
Right.
I was thinking in terms of timeline because I have to stop at 5 p.m. What about?
Let's give in Armenia time. It's approximately 4:15. We give 4:25 for you to, and then each group has 5 minutes, and that would give us time for your appointment, and we can discuss later here. Is that okay?
Yes. So
let's get started.
Basically, 10 minutes for the group working, 5 minutes for each group to report back, and then the roundup.
Yep. Let's get it done.
Good to me. And Horst, I will PDF my third slide deck and attach the information for further information, and we can circulate that to the delegates.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I must write here one of this, not one, something.
Yeah, a condition, yes, maybe.
Inspiration. Move all people to the other side.
Change.
We must move all people to the other side. Side. Source. One soil control. All soils. This is just like to take into consideration source removal.
Where are you blocked?
All people.
So you have environmental.
No, social.
So okay. So what is maybe you can also think about workers. Exact public.
Source removal or move all people. Source removal and source removal.
Sensitive.
Because it's about and you remove something from one side to another, and there will be also people. Yeah, so actually that's a good thing. But I mean, what you're thinking is good. Just note down what exactly are the things. Yeah.
The soil containing rubber plant.
Yeah. Horse said uranium and thorium. Uranium and thorium.
Yeah.
From the
if continue very possible, will be very effective on removal. Will move all people to labs.
Think now you can just think to compare the options. Like don't think now about what is the dose, just compare the options. Like which one is bringing the highest dose or something like that. So don't think in absolute terms how high it is. You have to give the medal and record. So and after this,
Which is
documented
what?
This is the rest. Continue.
Do you have the document which is contains the
Okay.
explanation?
Okay, right source removal and what's this time separation will be to another side.
No, separation means that you take out, for instance, uranium and maybe you use it for fuel,
Separate means separate people also separate
separate the
source.
radioactive content, you take it out. That's what it means. So whatever remains, let's assume that you can make assumptions. When you don't know, we assume that we are taking it all out.
The difference between separate radionuclide as a source and source removal.
Source removal means you take the entire, it's like a bucket, you move the bucket to another place. Separation means you start putting in the bucket and you take out.
People.
Okay, so removal
source
means you
removal.
take it from there and you put it somewhere else.
But we can't detect the source. Or
No,
soil contain.
I know what you're saying. Source is not family. So in this film there is uranium and thorium mixed up. Okay, so you can like take it out and put it somewhere else, or you can take the uranium out and leave the rest in place.
Is this we can choose people? Yes. Because we can't remove all source and we can't.
Containment means you avoid that it goes into the water table. And if you don't agree, don't spend too much time. If you don't agree, okay. Try to if this is more or less okay, but you can also think in terms of worker. I don't know. Perhaps you have to think about. Well, if you move it, you have the truck driver, I guess. If you separate, maybe I don't know. So you can consider.
Who?
Exercise.
But we can't filtration all soil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Each one only about the exercise.
I agree.
You? I can't understand. Yeah.
This is just a here.
Cover it.
You have to be hard.
You gotta come to this area.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
like this.
No, like this is
This should be one.
3.
No, this is
But only workers, when people die in cell,
yes. I can say human health engineering.
yeah. also health in general. Believe this. Workers mean workers in this project. Already I work.
When you don't know something, just like
We talk about the area and people like this area. All human part. Human is in general. You can write okay, you can write okay, we can write because of the dust of the soil, dust of and this signifies being related to the underground water.
More technology.
Okay. And some planets will absorb these ions from the soil. Some planets, yeah, some planets will absorb this radioactive ions, not. You can explain it.
You have to rank the first
Yeah, I said it's years level.
you have,
Okay,
and after that,
underground to the river.
we found
Okay.
number 1, 2, 3
What is
from environment. We should
yeah,
yes.
in the river. The biological in the river. Yeah, drinking. Okay, the dust. biological lives. Biological lives. Fish or
First of all, we should look at so do we have emission to there? No.
yeah.
This is what I said. So, do we have soil and ground conditions? And we
All
have
these effect
already get something.
we repeat all human health. This all. Yes. The water and the planet. Yeah. And the trees. Absorbed radioactive ions from the soil. And after them, the human will eat. Plants. Yeah.
It's just sample.
job here. So the biggest terrorist. We're right. Yeah, yeah. This is for one. This will cause this.
Yes,
With this radionuclides will show cancer. Cancer.
then we can put the regular
It's cancer. Its effect on the liver. It can يظهر في الأنية and the common bubble in the liver. All this dust and water, organics, will absorb in the human body. Okay? And this iron soil absorbed in the liver and kidney. Okay? When they make this cancer. Just move inspiration.
Hey everybody, is it time to report back now?
All this data, all this.
I was wondering if someone could reconnect the camera to
Through the absorption of absorption of radionuclides ions here. Positive and negative ions of radionuclides.
So, I suppose we need to leave at 5 sharp. I know that it's not enough time. You were asking good questions. But if you can share your first impressions so that we can talk about them. And I think we can talk about all of them together, Paul, not one by one, otherwise it will take much of your time. You agree with that?
As you think that best was, you're there. And obviously, if this is a conversation that continues in the evening, you have a few drinks about the rankings and the indicators, then I'll be very happy.
We will come back to this in the exercise itself. So this is why this input will serve the execution of the exercise. So this is why it's here right now. Who is the first group to volunteer? So if there is no, oh, there is, okay. So which one were you taking care of?
Well, we are trying to do the environmental aspects. So Paul gave us the example of the emission to air. So we all agree what we are was in the presentation. So the best option for emission air is immobilization, and the second containment, and the third source removal and separation, or separation. So, for this, this explanation was in the presentation. So we will go to the second category, soil and ground, and the third, groundwater and surface water. We are trying to Can I continue?
Yeah.
So soil and ground conditions, we think it's related with groundwater and groundwater and surface water maybe. So we try to evaluate maybe together. So for us, the best option in this case is source removal and separation, because you can remove all the material, and for soil and groundwater in the area of the waste was disposed will have the best impact. And well, we didn't have so much time to discuss, but it's something like this. And the second is containment, because you create some barriers, chemical or physical, we believe, but the contamination maybe could happen, but not the contamination, but the transportation of the contaminants or some elements will stop totally. Yeah? And the immobilization will be the third. Yeah, contain the second. And the third, immobilization, because we think as well, you let the material and you just cover, and maybe this continuous the influence in the soil and groundwater, so will be the third.
What's this?
Group 2. And well, I don't know if some wants to add something.
Let's hear to all the groups, and then we make a comment. So if you can, yeah, can you pass the mic to the? Did you hear, Paul?
Yes, I'm just checking. They didn't offer. Gentlemen didn't offer comment about ecology or natural resources and waste.
They didn't have time to do all this, so we will take as it is. Okay, group now. Which group is this? One.
Okay, we have 4 technologies, and we know from the beginning that there is a historical contamination, 50 years historical contamination. So it means that this source removal doesn't make any sense here, and it will be costly. We're speaking about, of course, environmental issues, but we remember also about economy. So our ranking is as follows. The first it is containment. Second, it is immobilization. The third one, separation, and environmental.
Yeah, but the first technology?
First technology, it's the best one is immobilization in our case, in our opinion.
Are you talking about effects on
Containment, sorry, containment. The best one is containment.
Is this for emissions to air, or is this for?
It's our final. It's our conclusion, but also I will try to in detail describe in more detail. In terms of air emission, The worst one is the source removal, because we need to move a lot of material and we need transportation of a huge amount of material in case of source removal. So in case of air emission, it will be the rank 4, source removal rank 4. For other technologies, it's difficult to estimate the air emissions. But in our opinion, the source removal is the last one in terms of air emissions. We also know that there is a sand, and if it is not capped, we will still have contamination of groundwaters. So the best one here is containment. The second, immobilization, because it is capped, and when separation, because we remove part of the contaminated part, but we are not sure that all will be removed, and we will still have contamination of groundwater.
Okay. So let's move to the other group in the back.
Yeah, we. Okay,
Which group is this?
Okay. Yeah, this first. Okay. Sit this.
What is it, guy? The Zoom is frozen, but keep going.
Okay.
Is this, what is the
The group for social.
search?
For social.
Go ahead.
Okay. So for the human health and safety, we choose on the ranking 1 for containment.
Speak.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Change your seat, please. Come. This is speaking.
But I can speak like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
For 2, immobilization, and the last one, source removal and separation.
Can you give any argument for that?
Yes, for the first one, we thought that it could be the dust and the migration of the radionuclides to the river. So the impact of the biota and the plants and the human health after that.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to rewind, because my connection was dropped.
Yeah.
So I don't know where we are in the reporting.
So we are, thank you. So we went through another group on environment, and they made a case for containment as the preferred option and source removal as the last option, and they were a bit of uncertain about the second and the third option as mobilization and separation. So this is the preferences they provided. And now we were discussing with the group on social now. And Alexander, please, can you repeat your arguments?
Okay, so for the first one, we choose the containment because we thought that the dust and the migration of the radionuclides to the river could impact the biota and the plants and implicitly the human health. Yes, the highest impact, the containment.
So this option is trying to minimize the highest impact, right?
Yes.
So this is why it comes first.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. For the immobilization, we thought about the vegetation on the surface.
Go ahead.
Okay. And for the last one, we all this we thought that all this reason will affect to the absorption of radionuclide ions into the human body. So will affect also the workers, the drivers on the for the source removal and the separation. And if we will move the source from one side to another, there will also be human, and it could affect the human health also. So we thought that is the worst option.
Okay.
Can I just make a comment? Alexandra, you've done the first category, human
Yes.
Health and safety.
Yes.
I do like the way that you are looking at consequences. So you are, I mean, obviously this is just an exercise,
Yes.
and we can argue about the exact technology, but in your mind, you are saying, well, if we do the containment of the mobilization, then we could still get transport of radionuclides to the vegetation, and this could reach human health. And I think it's important that we think through consequences. So I like that.
Okay.
Okay, well, just to make use of your time, let's go to the next group. Thank you, all the three groups so far. Sorry that we are running a bit, but we will have time to discuss this more in detail. So this is now group 3, I guess, right? This is 5? Economy?
Yeah.
You want what?
I guess I refer to
The third group, go ahead. So let's
because
the three.
the
So
economics
that we
is
finish
ours.
both social and...
But they have economic. They have economic.
Yeah, but this is the last one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so in terms of human health and safety, separation was considered the worst, assuming that the process, some of the processes or most of them are gonna be on site. So the interaction with workers and also the environment and ecology will be more. Immobilization is we assigned 2 out of the 3, and then source removal and containment we gave it 1. So why we assigned 1 to source removal? So compared with separation, assuming again the processes happening in source removal and then separation, we find that there will be comparably or relatively of less impact and risk. In terms of ethic and equity, although Paul just came up with his opinion in the presentation, but we find that immobilization out of the other 3 options, compared with the other 3 options, it will have, let's say, a bit worse condition as we put or leave some stuff behind for the upcoming generations. We find ethic-wise it might not be very, let's say, competitive with the other ones. In terms of neighborhoods and locality, we find that the immobilization, ergonomic-wise, if we speak, has the best, let's say, ranking, and then the other 3 will have, let's say, separation will have 3, and then the other 2 will have 2 assigned. And in terms of community involvement, all 4 options have similar ranking. And from uncertainty and evidence, source removal we find is the best option, as it might be more clear for the local community, as they find that there is nothing gonna be left there, and they might be happier with that. So bit subjective approach. Altogether, source removal is the best, and then comes containment, and then immobilization and separation have similar ranking.
Separation and immobilization.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to say a few things, but I could keep them till the end.
Yes.
So I'm listening. I'm really pleased with how the exercise has gone. I'd like to make a few comments at the end, if that's okay.
That's okay.
But I would like this group a mug or something. I think they should win the prize because they've got through all 5.
So let's see the last group.
So our group, we assume for direct economic costs, the first is immobilization, because we need equipment, workers, chemicals, takes a long time period, inexpensive, less monitoring. We need and wide range use. The second one, containment. Also, we need safety equipment, guards, payment for the guards, for security, and monitoring systems, and also takes a long time. Third is separation, expensive technology, because it's expensive technology and it's waste management procedure, and means solid and liquid form if you have some like this waste. And the last one is source removal. We need trucks, fuel, shield containers, cost of the transport for storage and storage. Yeah. We need the workers, drivers for these activities. Yeah.
All right. Okay, Paul. So back to you.
Do any more of the categories, or just the first one?
Say it again. For this group?
For this group, did they do any more?
For this group, they elected immobilization as the preferred option.
But no, they did not have time to look into another economic indicator on this one.
No worries, no worries.
So if you want to make a kind of general overview.
Yeah, I think that everybody seems to have got the general idea. I think the things to be cautious about when you go to the exercise, Horst, in more detail. Somebody commented they were doing the environmental, but they commented that cost was also important. Yes, but it's really important for each of these indicators that you focus like a laser on that indicator, because otherwise you will end up double punishing. You know, there's another place to talk about cost under the economic indicators. So the whole idea of looking at this indicator by indicator is to break the argument down. So just take care that you don't double count or double punish, and if you're using an indicator, you stick closely to it. The other thing that people I don't know how much people were considering this, but impact can occur on-site or off-site. So source removal might have a low impact on-site in the category, but a huge impact on the site where the source is moved to. So this comes to something called a system boundary. And just because something is happening off-site doesn't mean it should be excluded. And I'm sure Giuseppe will come back to that. The other thing that's really interesting is I think that the people in the audience have brought their own contexts to this. And the national and regional and local context is really important in the sustainability assessment. Somebody mentioned the need for guards, for instance. And this could be something that's really quite important in some locations and not in others. So I thought that was really interesting. And the other thing, which I think one of the social groups really brought out, was just how multifaceted this is. So there may be no perfect solution. We're just trying to find the optimum solution. I'll stop there because I'm sure, Horst, you need a few minutes.
Yep. You stay with us, or you just want to be excused, Paul?
I'd love to be excused. I'm going to wait for your closing comments, Horst.
So that's of course this needs to be. You need to have more time to dig and to dive into more details. My first observation is that you can see that the preferred options under different headings can be different, right? That it means that whatever may be the preferred option in terms of economic may not be the preferred option in terms of social, and how to balance all this will be eventually what we'll be doing tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So there will be tools that can help you to come to these decisions, or at least inform you in the context of this decision. So we will have weights, we will have a capacity of making a more balanced decisions. Paul mentioned optimal decision. This is essentially what we call on Monday, yesterday, optimization. What would be the optimal solution? As Paul mentioned, maybe there will be no perfect solution, but there will be an optimal solution, and that will depend very much on the acceptance that you get to implement such kind of solutions. We talked about it. Sometimes people know what they want, but they may make these decisions based on false assumptions and basically false assumptions, and without contemplating the full spectrum of consequences of these options. And that will be always a very critical point in terms of making such kind of decisions. So my take is that whatever appears to be the best option for one group may not be seen as such for another group. And this is where the participatory decision-making process, the inclusion of the stakeholders in this overall conversation will be very important. Of course, I could dig a little bit more on the technologies that we are talking about. I could say, for example, nothing would be done without a permit that would ensure the safety of that particular option. For example, if we are going to do separation of a valuable metal, for example, that would be done in a safe way, that the workers that it was mentioned would be protected necessarily. So that would be taken care of. And I could say that depending on the economics of that, taking valuable material from the waste and reinvesting in the remediation, as we discussed before, could be eventually a good option. I contemplate the fact that Group 5 asked me about how the long-term performance of containment or immobilization? What about the performance of the engineer barriers? That's a good point to discuss, because eventually these things will erode or will crack or will be gone, and then you will have also the long-term stewardship, and then you have the institutional control of these things. So there are many things that come into this discussion. But what I think it was important, Paul, is that you raised the indicators that you need to consider to make that decision. It's not only one goal, it's not only one thing, it's a multitude of criteria that you need to deal with, and the difficulty is to find exactly the best, the optimal solution, as we mentioned yesterday. And also we talked about this today. So this is my take, very briefly, on the exercise. Back to you, Paul. We cannot hear you. You are muted.
Thank you very much, everybody, for letting me be with you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. You sound like a very interesting group, and I'm sure that Horst and Giuseppe and Catrinelle are finding you very stimulating to be with. And I wish you all the best for your remaining time, and I wish you all the best with your future careers. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. So, just to summarize, Catrinelle, you want to add something on the exercise?
Well, I think it became clear to everyone how difficult it is to work with indicators that you didn't know before. So I was just saying that I think it's clear how difficult it is to work with indicators that you have not seen before. So you can also imagine why, I mean, this also strengthens the need for participation. If you go with this kind of assessment to stakeholders, even if in theory it's transparent, it's not necessary that they will understand what you have been doing. Whereas if you start constructing these indicators together with stakeholders, let's say, there would be a better understanding of why you are using certain indicators. Or you can, another possibility is to use bottom-up and top-down approach. Let's say you start from bottom-up, you identify some indicators, and then you could look through this list to think, oh, maybe I forgot something, so perhaps some aspects are still important. So that may be also a strategy. But I think you did very well to try to navigate through this complexity. So well done.
Is that?
Just to maybe to put your attention to the fact that there was a lot of consistency along the whole day about what we were talking. The issue I insisted this morning that if you need the plurality of dimension, then you need the conflict. You immediately realize that if you look at the environmental, the social, the economic dimension only, you get different ranking. This is exactly where multi-criteria analysis is about. You immediately realize that sustainability is inherent in the sustainability concept, this conflict. So we have to look at possibilities of dealing with these conflicts. And this is exactly what we are going to see in the coming days. So we are not only presenting problems, as I said this morning, these issues are very complex. We don't have simple solution, but let's try to have at least the right approach to this type of problems.
Thank you, Giuseppe. My final words, just 5 minutes. As I tried to indicate before, you see that, I mean, just making a very, very rough interpretation here. But the group 1 came with the solution of containment. Group 2, that also through the lens of environment, prefer source removal and separation. Meaning that using the same criteria, you came to different options, different preferences. Now you can imagine how to deal with this in a community of people that would present also different preferences for different solutions, how to come to an agreement in these particular cases. And this is just looking into the same environmental aspects. Then when we talk to social, you see the same thing happening. So you can have divergence under the same criteria, but also among them. And when you think from the economic perspective, there is a preference for something else that has not been considered in the other groups. So this is what exactly Giuseppe and Catrinel will be talking tomorrow. We gave you the fundamentals, the theory that underline those things. Of course, that is missing more information on technological aspects, of course, because it's not so simple to make this analysis. As I mentioned, there are issues on performance of the technology that are applied. There are issues about economic considerations on recovery of materials. You need to dig more into refined calculations to demonstrate that. But what we're going to have now are some tools that will help you to operate the decision making of this type of situation, but in a more consistent way, right? And important thing is that what Paul mentioned, that we are zooming in one specific part of the problem, but we have a bigger problem to deal with, and that would require more consideration about the integration. But this is a good strategy because I try to show you in one of my slides that you can shrink the problem by defining treatment units. You take the site, you split the site into different units, and you prioritize which units will be taken care first. For example, in the Hanford site in Washington State, they had wastes that were leaking into the Columbia River. So that's a receptor that would be taking the contaminants from a site that was much larger. So in terms of prioritizing the objects that would need to be addressed, this one was the first one they decided to pick up. So in this site, we can also think about, with all the issues that you need to take care of, what would be the priorities that you would be dealing with in terms of all these aspects that are here. So it's a very complex process. And as much as complex the site is, much more complex will be the decision-making process. There was a question there. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I come to you. No, wait. Everybody needs to hear you.
Okay. You said before all these reasons which Andra said, we want to make a characterization to the soil and the water and the underground water of this area, so we can answer this, which if the content of radioactive radionuclides in the soil is more or less, then we can treat it, and if in the water we can treat it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree what you say. I mean, we're just making something very complex in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But the idea is not to tell who is right, who is wrong, who was the best group, who was not the best group. The idea is just to show you the complexity of the process and what are the kind of things that you need to consider, you know? So any other group, any other comment, something that you are not comfortable with? So if that's not the case, we can adjourn for the day. And tomorrow we are back at 9. with, who is the first one? Yeah, Alan will be talking to us tomorrow first about the sustainability in the generation sector, right? So thank you very much for your attention. Good job. Don't drink too much. Be careful with the cognac. And have a good relaxation.